excited to hear Cara's presentation. I thought before we jump into the details of all of the amazing work that our restoration staff is doing, I would show a few, give a little bit of history of this restoration site and this project. The project we're talking about tonight is on a property called the Watsonville Slough Farms. It's owned by the Land Trust, and it's a property that Watsonville Wetlands Watch has been working on for a really long time. So I think I just want to show a little bit of few vignettes of where we could have been had not the Land Trust and Watsonville Wetlands Watch become part of this story, and where we are today, just to give us a little bit of perspective. So I'm going to just share my screen here for a second. Can you see that? Cool. Let's see. Okay. So this is, we're going to be talking about, and Cara's going to be presenting her work on this agricultural property right here. It's part of this 500-acre ranch that's owned by the Land Trust. And throughout the 90s, there was a large development plan that intended to develop this whole 500-acre ranch into this property that you see here. It's called the Thai property, and they wanted to build 500 homes and 2 golf courses and a high-end residential development. And Watsonville Wetlands Watch and a lot of local partners became involved at that time to say, sort of at the beginning of Watsonville Wetlands Watch, to say, hey, this is not the vision that we have for wetlands and our environment and urban growth within the city. And we want to see a different reality. In around 2010, things had changed. There had been an urban growth boundary placed around the city. Urban development for this property that's right below the high school, this is the high school here, no longer seemed feasible. And the landowner, out of a good fortune, there was an opportunity for the Land Trust to purchase the property, which they, with public money, were able to do. And Watsonville Wetlands Watch and the Land Trust and the Resource Conservation District and a couple local biologists at that time developed a long-term management plan for the property after it was acquired, with the goal of really developing a space that integrates environmental restoration and agriculture in a way that demonstrates that they could be mutually beneficial, support one another, and do things at a scale that really could be replicated throughout the Pajaro Valley, but as well as throughout California and throughout the country, really not just working with real small scale ag, but really working with large scale ag, which is a really important part of making restoration work successful in the Pajaro Valley and beyond. The project that Cara's been shepherding and stewarding and overseeing, and we'll share tonight, was kind of the cornerstone of the management plan that was developed. We looked at all of the resources on the property, the wetlands and uplands, and all the ag footprint that you see here. And what came out of that process after a lot of dialogue with the growers was kind of a large compromise and a whole lot of restoration projects and practices. And this here became this very high priority project because it's surrounded by wetlands, and it's kind of like creating its entire new ecological reserve within this agricultural footprint that would be an amazing support to wildlife like burrowing owls, which we have returning to the slough system, nesting birds, short-eared owls, and coastal prairie and grassland. It was this very exciting promise of what could be for this property. It took about 10 years to get to the point where we started the restoration project. So it's been a long time coming, and I'm just really excited for Watsonville Wetlands Watch and Cara to be able to share this work and all of the amazing grassland restoration that's happening, but more importantly, the collaboration between the agricultural operators on the property, the community, youth that have been involved with this project, and so many different facets of making a project like this successful, not just in the short term, but really long term, and having these echoing or exponential effects over time. So really excited to have Cara speak tonight. And I just want to, she's been working with Watsonville Wetlands Watch for just over a year now, and we're really excited for all the great skills and work that she brings to our organization's efforts. So glad to be here, and it's great to see you all.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so I'm just going to give a quick bio of Cara, which some of you may have seen, but just to give an overview of her qualifications. Thanks again for joining us tonight for her presentation, Ag to Coastal Grassland, Adapting Mechanized Farming Methods to Native Habitat Restoration. She's going to be giving us an in-depth look at our local wetlands restoration work. And this is work that she presented to the California Society for Ecological Restoration, CIRCAL, conference in Carmel earlier this summer. There will be time after the presentation for questions and answers about this project and other aspects of our restoration program. So please put those in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat as Cara gives her presentation. If it's like a quick clarification, I'll ask Cara to address that as she is presenting, but for more substantive questions, we'll save those to the end for a Q&A session. Cara has restored wetlands and associated habitats in the Monterey Bay area since 2003. She holds a MS in Coastal and Watershed Science and Policy from CSU Monterey Bay and a BS in Earth Sciences from UC Santa Cruz. She's an expert in monitoring. She uses a suite of techniques such as vegetation surveys, water quality testing, photo documentation, and rapid assessment of wetland health. She lives in Watsonville, and she really enjoys working with our community and making a positive impact on the land and the water. And it brings her joy seeing folks out enjoying the trails and connecting with our wetlands. And I love having her as a coworker. She's a delightful person, and I'm so glad she was available to make this presentation tonight. Thanks, Cara.
Great. Thanks, Brooke, for the introduction. And thanks to Jonathan for setting the stage and giving us some of the history and context of the area that I'm going to be talking about. I will go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. Okay, sorry. There we go. All right. I want to be able to see all you guys. Oh, well, I guess I don't really need to. All right. Well, I can't see any of you anymore, but that's okay. I can see my presentation, so that's all good. And Brooke, you can hop in if there's any quick questions I need to address.
We can't see it yet, Cara.
Oh, shoot. Uh-oh. Okay. Well, that's not good. Oh, that's why, because I didn't actually hit share. I wonder. Sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, now we can start the slideshow from the beginning. And now I can see you guys. Magic. Can you guys see the presentation now? Great. Okay, cool. So we're going to be talking about an area that used to be ag and is being converted to a coastal grassland, and how we adapted mechanized farming methods to native habitat restoration. So just an outline of what I'm going to be talking about. Jonathan set the stage, but I'll just go into a little more details about who Watsonville Wetlands Watch is and our partnership with the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County. Talk about the habitat restoration on the Watsonville Sioux Farms property, and then dive into this specific project, the grassland restoration of a former ag field, how we utilize ag equipment for various aspects of the project, seeding, planting, irrigation, prep, etc. How we go about managing the weeds out there, how we get the community and local youth involved and engaged, and some of the lessons learned. So Watsonville Wetlands Watch, you probably are all familiar, but I'll just go through some of these things briefly. We're a restoration and education nonprofit, and we restore degraded habitats and also preserve quality habitats. So it's important to keep the good habitat that's left to preserve it and keep it functioning, but also to improve and restore the habitats that are that have been reduced in function and degraded and damaged or disturbed by human activities. We also educate elementary, middle school, and high school students through several different programs, and we in the classroom and out in the field, we bring them on field trips. We advocate for conservation issues around the Pajaro Valley and foster the appreciation of wetlands in our community. So Wetlands Watch has a close partnership with the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County, and they restore and manage lands for multiple benefits. Some of those benefits might be habitat for endangered amphibians, birds, mammals, etc. Another benefit of restoration is water quality improvement, doing farm setbacks from riparian areas and wetlands, creating sediment basins to capture the sediment and filter it before it flows off the farm and into our local waterways. And another benefit of the land trust management of these farmlands is that they're farmed organically. And then there are community benefits. Some of the farms do community supported agriculture type programs. There's future planned public access to actually go out onto the ranch. And the farms out there employ a lot of people. So it's part of our community. So looking at Watsonville Slough Farms, as Jonathan mentioned, when they had the vision for what to do with this land as the land trust acquired it, part of the idea was to retire some of the lands that have lower crop production value. And partly maybe because they're on really steep slopes, or maybe the soil is poorer in certain areas and the crops don't flourish as well in those areas. And so they targeted parts of the ranch that could be retired. And once they decided to retire it from active agriculture, they had to decide where we want to go with it. What's the end game? What's the trajectory? And so it's a mosaic of habitats. And some of those habitats are things like coastal grassland, coastal prairie, coastal scrub, riparian areas, wetlands, and everything in between. Part of restoring the land out there, it is in a working farm. And so we have to coordinate with the farmers on land management, on when and where we're mowing areas, using the irrigation water out there. And I'll go into more details on a lot of these things as we go through the talk. So just to give the location, if you're not familiar, that green dot shows where the Watsonville Slough Farms is in the Monterey Bay. And zooming in a little bit, this is the city of Watsonville and the Watsonville sloughs. And as Jonathan mentioned, that green dot is in the middle of all of these sloughs. The wetlands kind of surround it. So it's really optimal place for restoration. And you guys are probably all familiar, but the slough that's closest to where the site is actually Hanson Slough, not Handsome, Hanson. And there are kind of two branches of it that go around this particular plot of land. The bigger slough to the west is Harkins Slough. And then the two main ones that go through town are Struve and Watsonville sloughs. So diving into this specific project, we call this project the Block 7 project. The ranch is divided into blocks that have been farmed for a long time, and the blocks are numbered, and this one happens to be number 7. So that's what we call it. And it was retired from active ag between 2014 and 2020. So the kind of lower portion was what was retired in 2014, and then the rest of it in 2020. The total is about 11 acres. We did an initial, I say we in the greater sense, because this was actually before I started with Wetlands Watch, but there was an initial kind of pilot project of 2 acres restored in the winter of 2020 to 2021. And then we, including me, did an additional 6.5 acres last winter of 2021, 2022. And then there are still future phases that are as of yet unrestored. And so we maintain these areas and try to prevent weeds from spreading through them through various techniques such as cover cropping and mowing and disking. So here's the, in 2010, it was when this area was, the whole block was actively farmed. It was in strawberry production. You can see those, that kind of silvery color is the plastic that they use for strawberries. And then this is fast forward 8 years, and that lower section on the left side of the cultivated area in this map, that whole area was retired in, I believe, 2014. So in this picture, it had been retired for a while, but the upper acreage was still in active ag production. And then this is last fall, September 2021 is this image. And so it shows the area in its unrestored but retired from active ag state, except for the initial pilot project was this area over here. Can you guys see my cursor? No? Okay. I don't know if there's a way to do a pointer, but the sort of central southern part is a slightly different color. It's south of those trees. There's about 2 acres that was initially restored. So that was the initial project. And then the rest of it that's kind of a lighter color is the area that was done last winter. And then the darker color on the left side is the area that's still yet to be restored. So to get ready for this project, there were a lot of things that had to happen on the front end. And one thing that we wanted to really put emphasis on was collecting seed locally for the project. We also, I'll go into this later, we had to buy some seed because we needed a lot of seed and we couldn't collect all of that. But for at least some of it, we wanted to collect local seed. The local seed has a lot of benefits. It has the local genetics. So the species that we are planting listed here: blue wild rye, meadow barley, California poppies, purple needlegrass, California brown, yarrow, blue egg-grass, and spreading rush. All of those are species that are found throughout large parts of California. But we wanted the genotypes that were evolved here locally in the Pajaro Valley, in the Watsonville area. And so we collected seed locally. One of the other benefits of collecting seed locally is it's less resource intensive. You don't have to ship the seed anywhere and use resources to do that. You just go out with some people, some staff, some students, some volunteers. In this picture, actually, we were collecting seed with the Amamutsan Stewardship Corps. They came out with us and helped us collect some seed. And we did a lot with our staff and with also with students, with our high school interns, and with volunteers on our 4th Saturday volunteer restoration day. So yeah, collecting seed is fun. It's very satisfying because you're harvesting the bounty of the earth to further it and to restore it and to heal it. And so it feels really good. Here's some seed that we collected just a few weeks ago with our during our summer training for our Climate Corps Leadership Institute high school intern program. So our interns helped collect these California poppies, and to be really efficient with the seed collection, you basically saw off most of the seed bearing part of the plant, and poppies kind of go dormant and go back to their roots and then resprout in the spring. So it's not hurting the plant overall, and it makes it a lot faster to collect a lot of seed because we needed a lot of seed. So then once we have a bunch of seed out here on a tarp like this, we spread it out more so that it can dry out, and then the poppy seeds is pretty cool actually. When they're ripe, when they're totally ripe, they kind of pop open, and it makes, you can hear the seeds like hitting the tarp, and it makes this pop, 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 pop noise. So it's kind of exciting. So then we took that seed, and with some of it, we contracted with a commercial outfit in the Watsonville area, Speedling, to grow out over 100,000 plugs. And plugs are basically tiny plants. They're in trays of 200 or 300 per tray, and each tray has little compartments for soil, and they sow the seed in there. And the cool thing about working with a large-scale producer like this is they have very sophisticated equipment, and they have a kind of a vacuum sealed seeder thing that drops the seed very precisely into each spot on the plug tray. And so they can know that they're getting the exact number of seeds per plug, and the expected germination rates for those seeds and that kind of thing. So we gave them seed of 3 species, blue wild rye, meadow barley, and California poppies. And we gave them the local seed that we had collected to produce the plugs. And it takes 6 to 8 weeks for the plugs to germinate and grow to a size that they can be planted. You can wait longer than that, but that's sort of the minimum time frame. And we had pretty good germination with the seed that we provided. It was in the 70 to 80% germination range. So that was good. The reason we only did those 3 species and not some of the others that we had collected was because some seeds are more tough to deal with, more complicated and they wouldn't work with that vacuum sealed seed applicator. For example, the purple needlegrass in particular, the grass has what's called an awn, which is basically a kind of a long spine that's attached to the actual seed of the grass. And so with all of the awns in there, the awns get all tangled up with each other, and you don't really have, it's hard to get a good pure seed that can go through the seeder. So we gave them the species that would work the best with their equipment. Especially they like the California poppies because those are more similar to other seeds they might deal with, like broccoli or cabbage or kale or things like that. But they were really intrigued by the grasses. I talked to a woman there, and she said that some of their crew would just go and check out the greenhouse where they had our grasses growing. Like, what are these native plants? This is a different thing. This is not their normal thing, but it was just interesting for them to see. So in addition to the plugs being grown, we also wanted to just broadcast seed directly onto the field. And so for a lot of that, we purchased seed in bulk from a company that they grow it in basically farms of native plants. And for the 6.5 acres, we needed almost 200 pounds of seed. So that's a lot of seed. And so for the direct seeding, we had a mix of species. Most of pretty much the same ones that I named in the earlier slide. This slide has the scientific names if you're interested in those. And we use mostly the commercial seed, but then like for the yarrow and the blue-eyed grass and some of the other ones, the juncus, I think, we added in seed that we had collected. So it wasn't just the commercial seed, it was a mix of both. And then we applied the seed using this tractor mounted machine, this broadcast spreader. And you can see in the picture on the bottom right, they're throwing the seed mix into that cone shaped thing, and then it flings the seed out across the field behind the tractor. So when we were that number 194 pounds, well, how did we arrive at that? This is showing the table that we use to make those calculations. And the details on here aren't really important. I just wanted to show you that how we do it and kind of a little bit a peek behind the curtain, behind the scenes of what we look at. And it's based on things like the germination rate, you know, how many seeds, if you sow 100 seeds, how many of them are actually going to sprout? And as I said, when in the seed that we gave the plug producer, it was about 70 to 80%. But that's in very controlled conditions in a greenhouse with irrigation. So you might assume a lower germination rate for seed that's broadcast out onto a field. And then using all of that information, well, the other thing thing that some of these tables are based on is how many seeds are in a pound of seed. So you can imagine that varies a lot. If it's a teeny tiny seed like juncus, the spreading rush, there are a lot of seeds per pound. If it's like California poppy, that's a much bigger seed, or California brome is a bigger seed too, it'll be fewer seeds per pound. So all those calculations go in, and at the end we spit out a number that says, okay, we want, you know, this number of pounds of seed per acre. And then when we actually apply the seed, we mix it with sand, and the sand helps throw the seed further because it gives it weight. So when that broadcast spreader is being used to move the seed, to put the seed out there, the sand helps it helps it go further. And then we also add rice hulls just to kind of dilute it so that we can portion the seed into half-acre lots and make sure that we get the whole half-acre covered, and we don't just use all our seed in the first, you know, 1/8 of an acre or something. We found that the seed spreading is the most effective if we follow up with a harrow or a ring roller. The picture on the bottom right shows our Dan, our tractor operator, driving the tractor with a harrow behind it, which is basically a metal mesh thing with spines that poke down. So it basically kind of stirs up the soil and pushes the seed down onto it. And let's see, is there anything else I want to say about that? I think that's it. I guess I do want to just say, you know, we don't expect everything to germinate right away, but adding all this native seed out there, you know, some of it germinated this year for sure, but there might be more that will continue to germinate. So it's a continued benefit. So the next thing that we needed to do is prepare the ground for actual planting, well, and for the seeding. And so we partnered with one of the growers out there. So the Watsonville Slough Farms, the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County leases the land to several different growers. And one of them is Sun Valley Organic Farms. And so we worked with them to do the preparation, which basically means disking the field, which is the disker is a big machine that gets towed behind a tractor that has round discs. And the discs are really heavy. And so as they roll through the earth, they till it and stir it up and make it nice and loose and fluffy so that it's easier to plant into. And so we had Sun Valley, had them go out and disc it in preparation for both seeding and planting. So this is the cool part of the presentation. Well, hopefully all of it's cool, but I think this part is really cool. So we used this mechanical transplanter, and this is one of the key ways that we're translating mechanized ag methods into the restoration field. And so for this one, we partnered with one of the other growers on the ranch, Tomatero Organic Farm, and they have this mechanical transplanter. And you can see it has 4 seats on the back, and the people on the seats, they grab each individual plugs, and the plugs are about 2 inches tall by 1 inch wide. And then there's a plant coming off of it. So they grab the plant and they pop them into these holes in the machine. They just pop, 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 pop. And then the machine, it digs a furrow, it digs a row into the soil, and then it drops the plant in there. And so using these methods, using this mechanical transplanter, we planted about 87,000 plugs in over about 2 acres in a single day. So we're able to plant a lot of plants really quickly. And okay, I think, oh yeah, this video might be a little clunky, but this just shows how the process works. Whoops. There we go. So
Cara,
yeah.
so what were the folks following along?
Oh yeah, I was just going to talk about that. Thanks. Yeah, so the machine, you know, it digs a row and it pops the plants in, but then you're left with basically a V-shaped row that has a bunch of plants in it. And so the folks following along were basically closing up the soil around each plug. And then they also, if they have time, they'll try to fill in if because the folks on the who are sitting on the machine, they're going so fast. Sometimes they like miss a slot, which isn't that big of a deal. But the folks following behind will try to fill in if they notice a gap or something. And but yeah, mainly, so you know, one of the things we teach the kids when we're planting plants with them is all the main things that plants need to live. They need nutrients, they need water, and they need sunlight. And the nutrients and the water they get from the soil around them. So they get from their roots. The roots gather those things from the soil around them. So in order for the plant to thrive, the roots have to be totally surrounded by soil. So if we left the plug with, you know, maybe soil on 2 sides, but the other side's just open, they probably wouldn't survive, or at least they wouldn't thrive. So so that's why there's an additional crew falling behind, and they call it closing the dirt, the soil around the plant. And in that clip, Jonathan was there helping with that as well. All right, so once we had their plants planted, the next step was to apply irrigation. And we planted the first round in late October of last year, which, you know, ostensibly is the rainy season, but we all know how that's been the last few years. So to kind of eliminate that uncertainty of, are we going to get rain and is it going to water our plants, we put out irrigation systems. And so these are commercial ag overhead sprinklers. And so we partnered with another local grower out on the ranch, Salazar Organic Farms, to install the irrigation pipes. And then once we're actually ready to turn on the irrigation and apply the water, we have to coordinate with the neighboring farmers and make sure that they don't need to use the water. Because the main well pump that goes out to this site also goes to a few other fields. Both Salazar and Tomatero have fields that use the same water. And the farmers' needs are the priority because they're paying to lease this land out there and to use the water. And so we have to coordinate with them and make sure that that if they're using the water, we don't use it that day. We do it the next day or whatever. So then, those are all the kind of initial phases of the project of seeding, planting, well, soil prep, seeding, planting, irrigation, etc. And then once all that happens, then we have weeds to deal with. And there are a lot of weeds out there. So we use a lot of different techniques to deal with the weeds, to manage them. I won't say eradicate because I don't think that's really possible or appropriate, but we manage them and we minimize their impact. So one of the things we do that we did last year anyway is some flame weeding. So it's kind of exciting. It's literally like a flame torch that Amanda's holding there. It's attached to a propane tank and it targets the seedlings. So the little plants that have just barely sprouted. And so you want to go out there, either during or immediately after rain events to reduce any risk of fire. Definitely want to be mindful of that. This technique is the most effective on the weeds like mustard and radish. Less so on the thistles, I think, because the thistles have a tougher leaf to them, and so they don't wilt and die as quickly as the mustards and the radishes. But it was pretty effective on those because I think there was a lot of mustard out there that doesn't seem to be out there as much right now. So that's a win. So another approach for weeding is to hand weed. So to take out weeds with hand tools like shovels or hose, or even just your hands. And so we were able to work with one of the farm crews out there from one of the organic farms to come out and help us on our project. And so we had them specifically targeting the thistles, the Italian thistle, the bull thistle, the ox tongue thistle, the milk thistle. Well, there's also sow thistle out there. There's a lot of thistles. And one of the reasons we wanted to hand weed them is because they don't necessarily respond as well, or they bounce back from mowing because they have this rosette growth form where they have leaves that the root comes out of the soil, and then there are leaves that come out in a kind of in a circle right from the base of the root. So even if you chop it off, they'll just grow back from that basal rosette. So that's why we wanted to get out there and hit them hard with hand weeding while we could. But then the other aspect of weed management is actually mowing the whole area with a tractor. And so we do that in the spring, and that helps knock down the mustard and the radish. And it took about a couple days to mow 8 acres or so. So it's pretty efficient. It's much more efficient than hand weeding, but you kind of chop everything down. But the nice thing about mowing in the spring is you get those, you knock down those spring annuals, which are, a lot of those are non-native. And so you make room for the natives that, all the natives that we planted are perennial plants. So they live for years. And so their growth phase is usually a little bit later, maybe in the later spring or into the summer. So if we can get the weeds out of the way, it reduces the pressure and gives the natives more room to flourish, to get that other thing they need to grow, which is light. So if they're being shaded out by weeds, then they're not getting as much light. so that's sort of the primary parts of the project. And then, you know, in restoration projects, there are always things that come up and you'll need to adapt to those. And so this term adaptive management has become pretty popular in the last 10 years or so, but basically it just means that, you know, you start out with a plan, but you might need to shift that over time as things go and respond to conditions. And so one of the things we did as part of sort of adaptive management was we came back and did some additional seeding and plug planting in January of this year. We had a window of low rainfall where, I'm just gonna go to the next slide real quick. So this is the January rainfall, and you can see there was a little bit right at the beginning of the month, but other than that, there was almost none in the whole month of January. So getting towards the end of January, we're like, well, it's drying out, we can get equipment out there. Let's go ahead and jump on it and seize this opportunity. So we went with the opportunity to plant another 2.5 acres, and we had some plugs left over. Like I said, we planted about 87,000 in October, but we had over 100,000. I think we had about 105,000 total. So we were able to plant some more of those plugs, and we got some additional seed to spread over these other areas. Another piece of doing restoration is monitoring our projects. And so one thing that can be really powerful is photo monitoring. And it's neat to see the progression of the site over time. You know, picture tells 1,000 words and all that. So I set up standard photo monitoring locations around the whole project so that we could get the same view over and over again. And so this shows one of the sites. I have a few different locations to show you, and has a nice view looking out down towards Harkins Slough. And you can see in the first one, that was pre-restoration when it had been tilled and disked but not planted. November was pretty soon after the initial planting and seeding. So you can see that carpet of green, some of those at least are the natives that we seeded out there starting to germinate. And then the last one was taken just last month, and it was mowed recently. So the foreground is a little unexciting, but you can see there's some California poppies and things are starting to happen. This is another spot kind of showing the same progression. This is looking more west towards the barns and towards the Hanson Slough, the side part of Hanson Slough. And then this is more kind of in the middle of the parcel, the block 7. And you can see in that January photo, that was actually, I think, right about when we were about to do that second phase, that second 2.5 acres. So you can see that dark brown strip in the January photo is the newly tilled earth. And right above it is the area that was planted in October. It has a lot of mustard in it, but there are natives in there too, I promise. And as I mentioned, you know, later in the spring, we mowed that whole area to knock down that mustard and give the natives a fighting chance. And then in the final one, this was, you know, just last month, all of that orangey yellow, those are all California poppies in the kind of mid ground. So we had a nice bloom of poppies in that area, so that was nice. One of the things, you know, that's really important to Wetlands Watch is to involve the youth. And so we had our Climate Corps Leadership Institute high school interns come out and get some hands-on experience. We had them doing some weeding and also spreading seed in this area. And then we also partnered with the Santa Cruz Natural History Museum. They have a program called Earth Stewards that's for kind of at-risk youth. And so we brought them out to engage and do some planting and birding. He brought out that spotting scope, and in the water down in Hansen Slough down below there, amazing place for birding. There are often like white pelicans out there, and just all kinds of cool birds. And the students got really excited about that. They were pretty stoked to get to like look through the spotting scope and just, you know, be out there and see things.
Cara,
Yeah.
Linda had a question that maybe you can address before we go on about the decision making around what areas to seed and which areas to plug.
Oh yeah, so that's a good question. I probably shouldn't have made it. I should have made it more clear. So generally, we do both. So we do the plugs, and then we do the seed over the plugs. Or I think in some cases, I think we did the seed first. It's better to do the seed first, because then you can do the harrow and kind of mash the seed into the soil, and then come through with the plugging machine and plant the plugs. So typically we do both. There were some areas where we ran out of plugs, so we have some areas where we just did seed. But it's definitely a little more successful if you do both. And that was one of our lessons learned, I think. Well, I think this was sort of a known lesson from previous projects that Wetlands Watch had done similar to this, but we had an idea that it would be the most successful if we could do both seeding and plugging. So we did both. So yeah, some of our other lessons learned were that partnerships were really crucial to the success of this project. You know, we worked closely with the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County, the landowner, the neighboring growers who lease the ranch land from Land Trust, the seedling producer, the native seed supplier, et cetera. Another important lesson was that we needed to be adaptable. The weather conditions in particular affect the timing of planting and seeding, because you have to be able to get a tractor out there. And if it's rain, if you've had a lot of rain recently, you can't do that. I mean, tractors can do a lot, but they can't plant plants in mucky mud. So we really had to watch for the window and just be ready to go as soon as we got that window of opportunity. Another thing that we discovered was the equipment, the mechanical transplanter was sensitive to the condition of the plants, of the plugs. Like I said, we planted most of them in October, and then we held some until January. But so by the time we planted them in January, their roots had grown really dense, and so it was harder for the farm workers to get the plugs out of the trays and into the machine. And so that all of that was taking a little longer. And so, you know, that just moving forward, we'll try to take that lesson and just get everything planted all at once, so that we don't have to hold it and let the condition kind of deteriorate a little bit. But we were still able to use pretty much all those plants that were left. So that was good. Let's see. There's a lot of important details, so many details to be concerned with, particularly with the irrigation. You want to have the right timing of when you apply the water, and also coordinate with the growers, as I mentioned, to make sure that they don't need the water when we want to use it, and addressing problems that come up as they arise. One of the grower who we worked with to apply the irrigation, you know, he and his crew set up all the pipes, and then I was talking with him, and we were talking about, okay, we're gonna, you know, go out and run it sometime, you know, next Monday or whatever day it was, and he said, well, he can come out if there are problems. And then he said, siempre hay problemas. There are always problems when you initially, especially with these irrigation things, you know, in that picture on the left, you can see there's water kind of spouting from the main connection. And so you have to troubleshoot and figure out how things need to be adjusted so that they all work. Oh, this is another video. Shoot, did I put that in the wrong order? Well, I guess that's okay. I just wanted to show this video. It's kind of cool of some swallows foraging in the air above the field and the wind blowing the poppies. And it's a little bit weird image because it got squished on the computer, but I think it'll still be cool to see. You can hear the swallows chirping. So yeah, I think this area is moving towards a healthy ecosystem, and it's really exciting to see. You know, just in this initial year or so of restoration for the majority of the area, and you know, our native plantings are flourishing. You can see in this photo, we have all these beautiful poppies blooming. We've spotted deer out there. We've seen swallows foraging. Hawks are always coming overhead and looking for prey. Out in the field, I see spiders and crickets and beetles and all kinds of critters coming out to make it a flourishing, healthy habitat. So it's pretty exciting. So our next steps are to restore an additional 2.5 acres of that kind of lower section. And this is going to be challenging because, as I mentioned, this is the area that was retired from ag the earliest, so it's had more time to develop a lot of weeds. So one thing we're doing to try to get ahead of that is actually just last week, I think we worked with the farmer again to put out some irrigation pipes, and we irrigated this area. And so hopefully that will flush the seed bank of weeds, and the weeds will germinate from getting irrigated. And then in a month or so after when they're like little baby plants, we'll come through and disc it and get rid of all those weeds. And hopefully that will give us a head start with this next phase of restoration. And we'll do a similar protocol with, you know, seeding, plugging, and working with and irrigating, working with the farmers, all of that. And also bringing our students out there. So it's definitely exciting. It's always fun to bring the high school students out, and they get really excited to be there, to be out in the field and get their hands dirty. Well, most of them are excited to get their hands dirty, maybe not all, but it's really it's exciting to see them, you know, light up and really get into it. That's all I have, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Cara. So there's a question from the chat from Inga Marie. She wanted to know about management and weed control of large areas of hemlock, which she notes is present on other parts of Watsonville Slough Farm.
Yeah, hemlock is sort of an ongoing battle. We manage it in various ways. I think typically, you know, mowing or weed whacking can be pretty good. If you hit it kind of right when it's starting to flower, you can knock it back. And if you get the timing right, you can actually kill it by mowing it. But I've read something where like hemlock has a seed bank for like 10 or 20 years or something. So it's a little daunting, but you know, we're out here for the long haul. Yeah, there's the lower part of the field has a decent amount of hemlock. And so we typically mow that when we're out there mowing. We just mow it because then there's kind of an interface where at the bottom there's a bunch of hemlock and then it turns into willows. So can't drive the tractor into the willows, but we try to hug as close as we can to it to get rid of that hemlock. And I've heard some buzz recently about you know, it being poisonous, which it is. Obviously poison hemlock is poisonous, but I've never had any issues with pulling it by hand or weed whacking it or mowing it or anything. I mean, I make sure to wash my hands before having dinner and stuff like that. But I haven't seen that piece of it as because I read one article that was like, oh, you should just always use herbicide on hemlock because you don't want to touch it. And I don't necessarily agree with that. And I think Wetlands Watch does use herbicide when warranted, but only for when it's really needed. And hemlock, I don't think is that big of a deal.
Cara, can you talk about some of the other monitoring methods that you use in addition to photo monitoring?
Sure, yeah. So we haven't on this site, but on some of our other sites, we've been doing vegetation surveys using transect monitoring. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. You can do what's called point intercept, where you lay out a transect, which is basically like a measuring tape, and every meter or every half meter or whatever, you take a pin and put it on the tape at that point, and you record what plant species you hit. And so you can get pretty good data pretty fast with that method and get overall percent cover of natives and non-natives and invasives and bare ground and all that kind of thing. Or sometimes other folks also use what's called a quadrat, which is basically just a square of a certain size, either a meter square or a quarter meter. And within that quadrat, you estimate the percent cover of each species. That's a little slower, but you can catch, sometimes you catch more species that way that you might not catch on a point intercept. So that's vegetation monitoring. As I mentioned, Wetlands Watch also does water quality monitoring. Or I guess I don't know if I did mention that, but I think that was in my bio that I do water quality monitoring, have done for a long time. But so I run that program with Wetlands Watch. Every 2 months, we go out and collect water samples in the sloughs and look at things like nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, bacteria, E. coli, things like E. coli. And then the basic parameters are like the temperature and the pH and the salinity, stuff like that. And then another monitoring method that I'm an expert in is the California Rapid Assessment Method, CRAM, which is used to measure the health of wetlands and streams. And so it's a rapid method, and it looks at the landscape. It looks at the hydrology, where the water comes from, how it's manipulated. It looks at the physical structure of the wetland and how complex that structure is. And then it looks at the biotic structure, which is mainly the plant communities and how diverse they are, and if they're native or non-native. And so that's a rapid method. It takes a couple hours to go out and assess a site, and then you get a score out of 100 that tells you about the health of the site. So I think I'm getting ready to do some of those on one of our other projects before the project gets constructed. And so we'll have a baseline of what the condition of the project is pre-restoration. And then after restoration, we'll do another CRAM assessment, and we can compare before and after and see how much the habitat has improved.
Cara, I was going to ask Cara about how, when you're planning for a project and you showed that kind of spreadsheet of the different seeds and the calculations, like how do you know what species you want to use and what percentage cover you want them to have when you're doing restoration of a place like this that has been used for ag for so long?
Yeah, so the species we selected were pretty typical coastal prairie species. And so, we don't necessarily have historical information showing exactly what this habitat was in the past, in the pre-European landscape. But we do know that this region in general had a lot of beautiful coastal prairies that were really important habitats. And so, and we know that this, the slope and the aspect and all those kinds of things are appropriate for that type of habitat. And so that was part of the selection. And then it also depends, maybe not specifically for this project, but for other projects where we're planting more larger container plants. It depends, what we have in our nursery and what we've grown, but we also, if we want to bring in a new species, then we collect seed of it and grow it out. So it's all about combining the vision and the practicality. So you want to have a vision of what the habitat is going to look like, but also work within the parameters of what's available in the local watershed, and what kind of seed we could collect in bulk in the nearby area.
Thank you. And we have a question from Linda. Since you mentioned the water quality testing, she'd like to hear a little bit about how the water quality in the slough is doing.
Yeah, so well, we're actually getting ready to release a report card on that, so stay tuned. But so there are a lot of challenges with water quality, in the sloughs. There's a big urban area that drains to them. There's a lot of agriculture that drains to them, and so they do have high nutrient levels and high bacteria levels in some cases. But in some areas, we are seeing improvements over time through projects like this and projects that more specifically target wetland areas that can help treat the water. And we have an upcoming project on Struve Slough in the city that's going to add some treatment area. So we hope that it's improving, and the data seems to show that in some cases, but it's definitely complicated.
And then Laura asked if there is a place where project assessments are published or shared with the community.
Good question. I mean, we put out our annual report that Brooke put together, which was beautiful and had some highlights of some of our projects. So that's one of the places. And then, as I mentioned, we're about to release a report on water quality. What else?
I think one of the other indicators too has been, and Jonathan's on, so he could talk about this, but the volunteers going out and observing the species that are present and kind of documenting the return of some of the sensitive species and more species being present.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean that's the ultimate metric, right? We if you build it, they will come. So the ultimate is actually seeing the species out on the site. We have another project that's a wetland project, and within the first year of the pond being built, there were red-legged frogs in it. So that was like a huge success already. And then we want to continue to improve the habitat so that they can flourish. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at, what is the success of a restoration project. But in terms of like where the public can see information about that, there's also our social media. We always have information about what our projects, some highlights of our projects and things like that, as well as the reports that we have on our website. So I think that's it. And I don't know what I haven't looked at the Land Trust website a lot, Land Trust of Santa Cruz County, but I assume they have some information as well about everything that's going on out at the ranch.
Yeah, and just to mention also that it was a new event for us this year. A few months ago, our Climate Core Leadership Institute interns led a bio blitz. So that's another kind of community and citizen science assessment of looking at all the species that are present, and that's something that volunteers are welcome to participate in the next time we go out and do that.
Yeah, definitely.
We have a question, Cara, from Inga Marie, about whether you use a specific variety of California poppy for restoration. And she said she recently learned the pale variety is specifically native to the coastal area, while the orange type is more native to inland areas.
Yeah, so there's a var marittima, a Schultzia californica is California poppy, and then there's one that's variety marittima, that's the more coastal variety, that has it has like a two-tone look with a paler center, and we have both out there. I'm pretty sure. We collect, all the seed is collected locally, so it's local genotype, and I think we're in kind of this interface of, out on the dunes, you might only have var marittima, and up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, you might only have the regular one, the orange one, but we kind of have both in this area. And then we also had one pop up that was white, but I don't know if that's just like a genetic mutation or what, but it's kind of neat looking. There's a really very pale yellow. So that was kind of neat to see.
And then Barbara had a question. She said that she and her family have 2 acres on Larkin Valley where they'd like to plant native grass and flowers. And she's wondering if you could suggest somewhere where they could acquire seeds.
Yeah, so for the seed, like I mentioned, if we were gonna purchase seed in bulk, we bought it from a company. Pacific Coast Seed is the name of the company. They used to be, well, they're still affiliated with Hedgerow Farms, but they've kind of changed their name. But anyway, Pacific Coast Seed would get you there. And then we grow native plants in our nursery, and we have a plant sale coming up October 15th. So if anyone's interested in purchasing plants there, we're definitely, we'll be selling them. And also, we're always open to working with landowners. If someone wanted to do a more in-depth project and have us collect seed and grow it out in the nursery into plugs or container plants, and even help plant it too, and that could be an option. So. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend just spreading seed. I mean, it can do something, but depending on the ground condition and stuff, if you just toss some seed on top of a bunch of like thatchy grass, it might not necessarily germinate that well. So you'd want to look at the specific site conditions and see what's out there already. Do you already have a native component, or is it completely non-native grasses? And if it's all non-native, maybe you can do some ground disturbance to potentially make some natives flourish better.
The other thing I'd say is we've done a lot of work with seed increase plots. So for a long time, we used to operate about a 1 acre seed farm on that ranch, and we would grow, something on the order of 60 to 100 pounds of seed a year. It was a fair amount of work, but it's definitely possible. And about 100 pounds of seed is enough to sow about 2.5 acres. So if you wanted to do a project of that sort, there are good, interesting ways to kind of explore and work on building up your own seed source over time, especially if you have something to work with.
Thanks.
That was all the questions in the chat. Does anyone have any other questions they'd like to ask Cara? And Jonathan's here as well. Okay.
We answered all the questions, the life, the universe, and everything.
I
want to thank.
Go ahead, Cara.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for being here, and I really appreciate your spending your time with me and hearing me talk about this project. It's been really fun doing this project, and as Jonathan mentioned, I started a little over a year ago, and this project has been the culmination of a lot of work out on the Watsonville Slough Farm. So I just kind of came in right at the right time to actually implement it, and so I'm honored to be part of it, and yeah, happy to share it with you.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of appreciation in the chat for you there, Cara. And I just wanted to mention to folks who are here that if you're interested in being a part of our wetland restoration efforts, we're always going out on the fourth Saturday of the month from 9 to 12 in the morning. And so that will be this Saturday, the 27th. And you can meet our team at the Fitz Wetlands Educational Resource Center on the top of the Pajaro Valley campus. And this month will be going into, I believe, somewhere on Watsonville Slough Farm.
Yeah, the Bryant Hebert property, which is sort of connected, adjacent. Yeah, so we'll meet at our office with our nursery and stuff, and then we'll caravan out to the site because you have to drive through some farm fields. So it's just easier to lead people out there than to try to give them directions. But any car can make it out there. You know, all the farm workers drive their cars out there, so you don't have to have like high clearance or anything.
I'm sorry, and what was that project this weekend?
It's our fourth Saturday volunteer restoration event. And so we'll be planting plants around a pond this is a different project called the Bryant Hebert project, but it's also land owned by the Land Trust. And it's a pond that was built last year, I believe, or 2 years ago. And we're planting natives all along the edge of the pond.
And if it doesn't work for you to come out this Saturday, it does happen monthly on the fourth Saturday. So thank you all for being a part of the Watsonville Wetlands Watch community. It's really nice to see you here. And thanks again to Cara for sharing this great project.
Yeah,
Thanks, Cara. Woo woo.
Thanks.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, y'all.